Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Tal Heinrich for All Israel News, and today I am very honored to be joined by an exceptional person who has done so much for the state of Israel and its people in such inspiring and creative ways. Mr. Sylvan Adams, an Israeli-Canadian businessman who has made it his life mission to help promote the Jewish state through sports and cultural and innovative events. Sylvan, I am so happy to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Tal. Nice to be with you.
And only recently, I forgot to mention, you just inaugurated the largest emergency room in the world in Tel Aviv's Ichilov Hospital. So congratulations and thank you for that as well.
Listen, it's a magnificent project. Very proud of it, and it's my gift to the people of Israel. We already have one of the best healthcare systems in the entire world, and this is the state of the art, the most technologically advanced and largest, as you mentioned, emergency ward of a hospital in the entire world.
But I want to begin our conversation on not such a happy note. You know, you are now in Israel, where a ceasefire is still holding on between Israel and Gaza. We're talking about IDF Operation Breaking Dawn against the Islamic Jihad. You just experienced a few days of fighting, missiles, interceptions in the skies. What is occupying your mind during such times? What does your day look like?
Well, first of all, maybe it looks a lot worse on TV, as most things do when the political reporters start, sending out their stories. So it for us, I have to say that it's not as bad as it looks by any stretch, and this is something that the Israeli military obviously felt it needed to do in order to stop this indiscriminate rocket fire coming from Islamic Jihad, which is a fanatical terrorist organization. And it seems to have had the effect, because the rockets have stopped. We have a ceasefire. We're not interested in creating conflict. We're interested in eliminating conflict. So happy to say that we are in a ceasefire situation, but to your listeners and viewers, just be reassured. We have Iron Dome. And by the way, what I like to say about Iron Dome saves Palestinian lives in addition to Israeli lives. Why do I say this? Is because if their indiscriminate rocket fire in my city of Tel Aviv, if it had killed, I don't know, 50 or 100 people here in Tel Aviv, we would have had to go into Gaza and basically flatten the place. So the fact that Iron Dome is intercepting almost all of the rocket fire that comes into Israel.
And we're talking about almost 1,000 rockets within this last round of fighting.
No, it's the technology behind Iron Dome is just amazing. It's basically shooting a bullet with a bullet. And I like to say, I truly believe that it is saving Palestinian lives, innocent Palestinian lives, because these fanatical jihadists choose to cause trouble, and for no particularly good reason.
Right. You know what they say about Israel, Sylvan, that it has 4 seasons: summer, elections, war, and strike.
Yes. I like summer.
Everyone likes summer, but one would assume that times like this, times of war, sure makes your mission a bit harder to draw big events, large-scale events, cultural ones, sports one to Israel, and yet you manage to do it time after time, again and again. How do you do it? How difficult is it to bring these people, these teams to Israel? Give us a bit of a taste of, some of the more recent events that you launched.
So let me just talk about why I'm doing it. Right. So I moved from Canada in 2016, and I know, everybody knows that Israel is portrayed in a very harsh light, with a constant media barrage of stories that come from this area. And in fact, the Israel that I know and love bears almost no resemblance to the portrayal by the media. So my experience with first-time visitors to Israel, and I do host delegations. There's an all-Canadian parliamentary delegation, all-party delegation that comes, non-partisan. Mm-hmm. And I always start when I greet them. I start with two questions. I say, okay, for whom is this the first time visit? All the hands go up. And then I say, how many of you had family or friends who said, are you really sure you want to go there? And again, all the hands go up. And we laugh about it because, you just look from my balcony, and I'm on the Mediterranean here. My view is the beautiful Mediterranean and the beach and the joggers and the people on their scooters and everything else. And so the picture of Israel that I know and love and that I moved to, and the virtuous Israel, which is just a normal democratic nation, Western nation, we get covered in a different light. So my projects, the idea behind them is to show Israel in the real Israel, the normal Israel that I moved to. I didn't move to a country that is any less democratic or virtuous or peaceful than my native Canada. And so I'm trying to, this is the image and so when we have these conflicts, of course, this is completely off message for me because it reinforces the fact that we live in a conflict zone, and we're a peaceful, loving nation, and all we want to do is live in our neighborhood peacefully next to our neighbors. And I'm happy to say that peace has started to break out. And that we now have I think it's 5 countries that we signed signed on to the Abraham Accords, in addition to Egypt and Jordan that already had peace agreements. So peace is breaking out in the region,
right?
Notwithstanding the imagery of the fanatical, terrorists from Gaza.
So take us behind the scenes of your activity. How do you shape your strategy in a way that would benefit Israel in the way that you just described? How do you choose which events to draw, which teams, sports teams, or if it's large concerts? Or tell us a bit. Give us some examples.
So I'm trying to reach extremely large audiences in the hundreds of millions. And in the case of the cycling event that I hosted here, the Giro d'Italia, the second biggest race after the Tour de France, it was 1 billion TV viewers. And I like to say, I mentioned my experience with first-time visitors who realize that Israel is nothing like their preconceptions. So I brought 1 billion first-time visitors to Israel via their TV screens. And bike racing takes place outdoors. So it over 3 glorious days, including 1 full day in the national capital of Jerusalem. We showed magnificent helicopter imagery of the entire country. And we had 1 million Israelis in the street, which is more than 1 in 10 citizens in the street watching the bike race. So I get to show a completely different image to extremely large audiences. I want the matches that we show to be real. So when the Giro d'Italia came here, it was part of the second most important race. The first 3 days were here, and then it's a 3-week-long race, just like the Tour de France, and it returned to Italy for the rest of the race. Likewise, we just hosted this a couple of weeks ago, the championship game of the French Soccer League, and we had Paris Saint-Germain with the biggest superstar in the soccer world, which is Lionel Messi, here playing the championship game of the French League in front of a packed stadium and about 400 million French soccer fans watching on TV all across the Francophone world.
And let me just stop you there for a moment, because I know that something that was very important to you is that Israeli and Arab children would also attend the game for free.
Yeah, so I provided 1,000. The stadium has a 30,000 capacity. I gave 1,000 tickets to Israeli and Palestinian kids, Jewish and Arab and Christian kids, that they could attend the game and see the biggest star in the world play in their hometown and in Tel Aviv. And so, I try to make sure that the kids are always involved. And these are not elitist things where only very wealthy people can purchase tickets.
So I want to ask you a bit about your broad vision of pro-Israel philanthropic activity, because from what you're describing, here's my question. Is your activity more aimed towards the hearts and minds of Israelis, or is it Jews around the world, or sometimes more of a PR campaign for the state of Israel, which is aimed at non-Jews?
So the answer is yes. So all of the above.
All of the above.
all of the above. So let me tell you, first I'll address each of those publics that you talk about. So the Israeli population here, the flip side for Israelis knowing that they are on the world stage is that it boosts national pride. And so during the Giro, which took place over 3 days, it was a 3-day national group hug where all of the various communities, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Arabs, Jews, secular, religious, of all of the communities, we all got along for 3 magnificent days. And as I say, it was like a 3-day national group hug. So, as I said, the flip side of being on the world stage is that it brings Israelis closer together. A little bit like, when we win Olympic medals,
right.
And, you're speaking to an American audience. Everybody knows that when even the USA that wins so many gold medals, when you win a gold medal, it boosts national pride. It brings people together.
It does. Well, back in the day, now the U.S. population is so polarized. We'll get to it in just a moment, but I don't know anymore.
No,
but in Israel,
what I'm saying is all of those communities within that polarized society, they are all cheering for the same thing, which is amazing. And that's the power of sport. So, as I said, the flip side of that for being on the world stage is that it brings Israelis together. When it comes to the worldwide Jewish community, for sure, it also takes pride in all of the achievements of Israel. When Israel is known for technology and for all kinds of green technology, high tech. Jews around the world do take notice and take pride in Israel's achievements. And why shouldn't they take pride in Israel's sporting achievements? So it's a similar thing. And finally, my biggest audience, as I indicated, are non-Jews around the world, just to show off, as I call it, the fact that we are a normal Western democratic nation, and show our true nature, our true a more accurate picture of Israel rather than just simply as a conflict zone.
So I want to talk about the Israeli society with you, which now you are part of. You made Aliyah how many years ago?
6 years ago.
Well, congratulations. So as someone who comes from Canada, or generally speaking from North America, where there's a culture war taking place now, which is really polarizing the society, and we see it playing out in the media, in politics, and in the public sphere, just the public discourse, and even at the workplace. You just can't run away from this. It's everywhere. Is it in any way trickling to Israel? How do you see unity in Israel within the Israeli society compared to what you recognize in North America? And I'm talking about Canada and the US.
So you're absolutely right. There is a polarization of ideas in the Western world. And Israel, of course, isn't immune to that. But I would say that Israeli society probably is more homogeneous when it comes to its political views, and less of a left-right divide in Israel because we live in a rough neighborhood. So everybody recognizes certain truisms. We want to make peace with everybody in the region. And we recognize that there are parties here, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, all these terrorist organizations that have no interest in that. So it's not like you can, be a crusader for peace when you can't when the other side doesn't really want to talk to you. So Israeli society is quite unified. That being said, we are extremely democratic. We have a whole plethora of parties. It's not like the U.S. where you have basically two parties that run against each other, and there's an alternation of power. Here, we've got coalition governments. We've never had a majority government ever in the history of the state. Mm-hmm. So they're always trying to cobble together coalitions, and some might say that Israel is a little too democratic, which is why we're holding our fifth election in less than 2 years. So they might say that we need a little more efficiency and perhaps a little bit less, be a little bit less democratic, and have fewer parties in the government. And these small parties hold the governments kind of hostage to their own narrow agenda. So in a way that creates polarization because there's resentment from the majority of the people to have to cater to small interest-based parties that essentially trade their support.
Smaller sector of representing a smaller sector of the population, and yet it can squeeze power out of other
power
parties.
and money because the taxpayer is underwriting these their agenda of funding their narrow ideas. So I guess so we are part of the trend of polarization in the world in terms of how acrimonious the politics sound. Mm-hmm. The politicians are not they're not as cordial with one another as I think used to be in earlier times. I think social media has exacerbated that problem. But in terms of the actual ideology in Israel, I think we're much more homogeneous than the United States and other Western.
We can't afford it any other way, probably.
No, because when we are when we are threatened, we have to be able to come together, and we do.
So I will tell you this, here in the United States, and I'm talking to you from New York right now, there is much talk about the answer to this polarization in society being a partnership between Jews and Christians based on Judeo-Christian shared values. Is it something that you witnessed in your position of, being involved also in Canada and in Israel so much?
First of all, let me say that I so appreciate the support of the evangelical community. We have no better friend in the entire world. I'll even go so far as to say there are, the evangelical Christians are probably better friends of ours than many American Jews and even Israeli Jews who take Israel for granted. And it's very important. We feel your support, and it's necessary, and it boosts our confidence that we as I said, we live in a rough neighborhood. It boosts our confidence to know that we have such support in the United States, and so I totally appreciate it. So I think making common cause with traditional values, belief in family, belief in God, belief, in traditional values. I think we can make common cause together. We are the people of the book. We are the older brother of the older brother religion in the Judeo-Christian partnership. by the way, I will give you a little my little take on Jesus. So, of course, Jesus. What was his profession? Jesus was a preacher. And Jesus walked around speaking to people and preaching brotherhood and loving thy neighbor as thyself and all the rest of it. And of course, Jesus was a Jew every single day of his life. Jesus's disciples went out and created the Christian faith, but Jesus himself was a Jew. So what do we call? I'm going to give you a little quiz here. What do we call a preacher, a Jewish preacher? What do we call him?
In Hebrew?
We call him a rabbi.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Of course, everybody knows that. So in fact, Jesus was a rabbi. So we are very close. The Jewish faith and the Christian faiths, we believe in the same teachings, the same ideas. And as I said, we are a brotherhood, and I believe that we should make common cause with traditional values and not disregard, belief in, false idols, which of course, that's the first commandment of the 10 Commandments, which were handed to Moses, and the Jews are the foundational. Members of Western values, starting with the legal system based on the 10 Commandments. So we shouldn't follow false idols like internationalism and communism and Nazism and all these terrible movements that were frankly ungodly and irreligious.
Well said, Sylvan. Before we let you go, just lastly, I want to ask you what should be looking out for your way in your initiatives.
So, as I mentioned, I do all these very large scale events, and let me just throw in a little parenthesis. I was honored to be invited to the White House for the signing of the Abraham Accord peace agreements with Bahrain and the UAE, the first two countries that signed on to peace agreements with Israel. And I was told by the peace negotiators and specifically the head peace negotiator, Jason Greenblatt, that 3 events in which I was involved helped create conditions. And this is the reason they invited me, because I'm not American. It was an American guest list. I was one of the very few Israelis to be invited to witness the accords, the signing of the accords. And Jason told me that there were 3 events that proved that there wasn't any hostility between the peoples of the Gulf nations and Israel. And it started with the Giro d'Italia that I mentioned a moment ago, the bike race. And there's a team from the UAE and a team from Bahrain. And before the race came here, I was asked by journalists, because normally those countries never sent their athletes here. And I was asked by journalists, are they really going to come? And I laughed. I said, of course they're going to come. It's the Giro. It's the second biggest race in the sport. And of course they're going to come. And sure enough, they came. And there was no reaction from their people. The second event, I support the Israeli judo national team. And we're pretty good in judo. We won our first Olympic medal in judo. So we were invited to, we went to Abu Dhabi to participate in a judo Grand Slam. And the head of international judo, Mario Svizer, who's become a friend of mine, he told them, listen, if you don't allow Israel to participate, we're going to pull the event from your country. So they allowed us to come. And sure enough, our judoka won. And our national anthem, Hatikva, was played, and our beautiful blue and white flag was raised. And again, what happened in the UAE? There was no reaction. The people really didn't care. And finally, my bicycle team, we used to be called Israel Startup Nation. Now we're called the Israel Premier Tech. We race in the Tour de France. We race first team from Israel to compete in the highest level of its sport, which is the World Tour of Cycling. And so we went to the UAE for the tour of the UAE, and we have Israel right on our jersey. And little Emirati kids were waiting in line to get our riders' autographs and souvenir water bottles with the word Israel on it. So they saw this thing, and I was actually a bit prophetic, and not knowing that just a few months later we'd be witnessing the signing of the Abraham Accords.
History in the making.
But I said at the time, we're creating people-to-people contacts, people-to-people bonds and friendships. And one day when our leaders find the right conditions to make peace with one another, we will have created the conditions for a truly warm peace. And lo and behold, the tour of the UAE took place in end of February. And in September, I was at the White House witnessing the signing of the Abraham Accords. So through sport, through breaking down barriers, through good sportsmanship, we can actually even attain peace between nations. And so I've never been more optimistic. I think that peace is breaking out here in the region, and I'm excited for our future. When I moved here, I had business cards made up with a new title, which reads Self-Appointed Ambassador at Large for the State of Israel. So because I'm self-appointed, I can't be fired or reassigned, but I said that I will retire when my services are no longer needed, meaning that Israel will be accepted in the world as a normal, democratic Western nation that we are, a virtuous nation. And since peace, maybe peace will break out, and I'll be able to retire from my duties.
Amen to that. You are a wonderful ambassador of the State of Israel. Thank you for doing so much for the Jewish state and for its people. Sylvan Adams, we appreciate this conversation and everything that you are doing. Keep it up.
Thank you, Tal. A pleasure to be with you, and wish us luck with our election, and hoping we don't fall into a sixth election in 2 years, because I'm sure that American voters are not thrilled to have to go to the polls with sometimes less than perfect candidate choices.
100%.